so we have a peaceful hour or so talking. Please make your telephones either on silent or turn them off. Probably best to turn them off, it saves the battery, etc. And then we can proceed again in comfort. First of all, a few parish notices, as it's stated here. You've all heard of the sad news of Susan Gilbert's passing. Her funeral is on the 20th of February, Thursday the 20th of February, and there are details on the reception desk. Some of you may have already seen those, but her funeral details are there if anybody wishes to attend. The next meeting here, 10th of March, Bob Thorogood is talking on his 40 years with the London Underground, and there are places available still for that. And also trips to the outside world. On the 16th of March, a tour of Route 350. On the 24th of May, a visit to Delane of Bourne. I certainly would recommend that. It's a marvellous operator run by a family there. And on the 25th of June, to the Swanage Railway, a steam train. So they're the dates. All those dates are on the website. I think some of it's probably in a magazine. So please, they're all vacant or have vacancies being booked up quite rapidly, but do try and come along if you have the moment there. Right, so I think I've covered all the essential bits that I should do tonight, for at least that part of the thing. And can I formally also welcome Paul here to talk about something dear to my heart. Forgive me if I bring aviation into your meetings, but I have quite a liking for it. About to say a love affair with it, but certainly it is interesting in contrast, but also in parallel to some of the things we do with surface transport. And Paul, you've got a lovely story to talk about, an operator that certainly pioneered aspects of aviation and transport, and one of those remarkable forms of transport we'll hear more about that unfortunately I don't think you can use today. But anyway, over to you, Paul, tell us what you will on it, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Tony, and good evening, everybody. Can you hear me at the back? Good, that's always a good start. Well, it's a pleasure to be here this evening, and thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you about Silver City Airways. The full Silver City story would occupy more time than we have available for my talk this evening, so I'm going to concentrate on just a few aspects of the company's history and operations, and looking particularly at the Silver City Air Ferry between the UK and France. And the first question that most people ask is, why was it called Silver City? And the answer is really quite simple. At the end of the Second World War, a company called British Aviation Services was formed as a subsidiary of the British Aviation Insurance Group, and its managing director was Air Commodore Griffith Powell, always known as Taffy. He had flown both land planes and flying boats for Imperial Airways before the war, and had become senior air officer in RAF Ferry Command, in charge of transatlantic ferry operations for new aircraft being delivered from the United States to Britain. Much of BAS's early work involved ferrying war surplus aircraft around the world. And as a result of one of these contracts, Taffy met the managing director of the Zinc Corporation, an Australian company with extensive mining operations at Broken Hill in New South Wales, a town known all over Australia as the Silver City. And one of the problems faced by the Zinc Corporation after the war was the need to carry out a lot of geophysical survey work to re-establish the extent of their mine's reserves, for which most of the specialist equipment and staff were located in South Africa. As there were then few suitable commercial air services available, it was decided in early 1946 to set up a new company of their own to be managed by BAS and called inevitably Silver City Airways. BAS was also a minority shareholder. The first flight took place on the 24th of October 1946, when an Avro Lancastrian, like this one, the civilian version of the famous Lancaster bomber, left London Airport for Sydney via Johannesburg. The round trip took 14 days. The new company soon had 7 aircraft, 4 Dakotas and 3 Lancastrians, and a maintenance base was set up at Blackbush near Camberley. As you can see, facilities were fairly basic. By 1948, scheduled air services had started to improve, as had the opportunities for independent operators in the UK, and the benefits to the Zinc Corporation of having their own air transport operation started to diminish. So BAS agreed to buy all the shares in Silver City and remained its parent company until 1962, using the name Britavia for its other operations. To go back a year, the partition of British India in 1947 had resulted in a massive exodus between the new states of India and Pakistan. Much took place on foot, by road or by rail. But in September of that year, BOAC organised an airlift, and Silver City's Dakotas were dispatched to assist. Taffy Powell soon became aware that a Bristol Wayfarer, the all-passenger version of the Bristol Freighter without the clamshell nose doors, was standing at the Bristol factory at Filton, and it was duly leased by Silver City. In India, this aircraft had all the seats removed and carried over 1,100 refugees in just 9 days, and on one memorable occasion had 111 passengers on board. This was the company's first introduction to the Bristol Freighter, a relationship that was to continue with Silver City and its successors at Lydd until 1970. A second freighter, a Mark 21, capable of carrying 2 cars, together with 10 passengers in the rear compartment, in fairly basic seating, was soon leased by Silver City. Now, why was Silver City interested in ferrying cars? Well, it seems that one of Taffy Powell's pastimes was taking his Armstrong Siddeley Lancaster car touring in France. And that is an Armstrong Siddeley Lancaster, but sadly it's not Taffy's. At that time, taking your car across the channel by sea involved having it craned on and off the ship and having the tank drained of fuel. Flying cars across 2 at a time had its attractions, as the flight was short and there would be no queues for customs. A trial flight between Lympne, which was an all-grass airfield near Hythe in Kent, and Le Touquet, took place on the 15th of June 1948, carrying Taffy's Armstrong Siddeley and a loading ramp. On arrival at Le Touquet, it was found that Mr. Sam Norman, the uncrowned jukebox king of Europe, was keen to have his Bentley Mark VI flown back to England. He had his own private aircraft, but no way of getting the car back. So a price, cash no doubt, and I'm told it was 30,000 old francs, was agreed, and his car became the first charter load for the Silver City Air Ferry. After suitable publicity, a public service was inaugurated on the 14th of July 1948, Bastille Day. And the photo on the brochure was actually taken at New York's LaGuardia Airport during a sales tour by one of the prototype freighters the previous year. I think it's either an Austin or a Vauxhall. I'm not sure what the Americans made of the car, but they were apparently quite impressed by the aircraft. Licence restrictions meant that the Air Ferry had to operate initially on a charter basis, and most flights were booked for their members by the AA and the RAC. The fare from Lympne to Le Touquet for a medium-sized car and up to 4 passengers was £27. That's equivalent to over £900 today. Facilities at both ends of the route were pretty basic, and at Lympne, one man initially undertook the duties of receptionist, traffic officer, car loader, and general factotum. And I'm told that he didn't even have his own phone and had to use the Ministry of Civil Aviation's one. Once customs were cleared, cars were driven up the ramp into the aircraft by a Silver City loader driver and shackled down in the hold. 90 minutes were allowed for a round trip, including loading, unloading and refuelling. The average flying and taxiing time was 50 minutes, leaving just 20 minutes at each end for all the ground services. By the end of that first season, the Air Ferry had carried 170 cars. The 1949 season started in April, with 3 freighters leased from the Bristol Aeroplane Company. The Silver City air crew drove to Filton in 2 of the company's vehicles, which were then flown back to Blackbush in one of the aircraft. 3 return trips a day were advertised, but bookings were slow, and other cargoes had to be found, including livestock and racehorses. By August, the picture had improved considerably, with 20 round trips a day, and 2 more freighters had to be leased. At the end of the season, Silver City had carried 2,600 cars and 7,900 accompanying passengers. The terms of their licence meant that they couldn't carry passengers without a vehicle. But this restriction was soon overcome by providing bicycles at Lympne and Le Touquet that could be hired by foot passengers. Silver City ended the year with a profit of £4,250, about £140,000 today, and their operating licence was extended for a further 2 years. Silver City also set up a company in France, Société Commerciale Aérienne du Littoral, or SCAL, just happened to be the same initials as Silver City Airways Limited, and established a close relationship with another French company, Compagnie Air Transport, or CAT. A 5-year licence was granted in 1951, and after 2 years of fare cuts, together with an increase in the foreign currency allowance, which I'm sure many of you here, like me, will remember, an increase from £50 to £100, equivalent to just over £3,000 today, the year ended with 7,500 cars and 30,000 passengers carried. With a fleet of just 6 aircraft, Silver City was able to operate as many as 48 round trips on busy days. This meant that each aircraft was making up to 16 takeoffs and landings a day during daylight hours. A decision was made to establish a second cross-channel route to tap into other parts of the market, and a service was started between Southampton and Cherbourg. It was also becoming apparent that Lympne was not an ideal operating base during winter months. Being all grass, it became so soggy after rain that some flights had to use West Malling, Blackbush or even Southend. In 1952, the foreign currency allowance was cut to just £25, and this came as a great blow to the company. Bookings dropped, and other work had to be found for the aircraft, including transporting Grand National runners, racing pigeons. Here we see baskets of racing pigeons being loaded onto a Silver City freighter at Southampton. I did wonder what happened to the pilot's weight and balance calculations if the pigeons all took off inside their baskets during the flight. But I was assured that that would be compensated by the downward thrust of their wings, so the aircraft could fly on in safety. They also carried lettuces, not to mention fruit and cheeses, which Taffy's family were often called upon to help unload. By July, Silver City had made a total of 10,000 channel crossings without incident and had carried over 24,000 cars. The company made a profit of £35,000, equivalent to about £1 million today. But having aircraft that could only carry 2 cars was now causing problems, and thoughts were given to finding larger aircraft that could also operate longer routes, such as Gatwick to Paris. The Blackburn Universal Freighter, later better known as the Beverley, was looked at in a version that could carry 6 cars on 2 decks. Here we see a lovely cutaway from the 1953 Eagle Book of Aircraft, without which no aviation enthusiast's library is complete. It could also carry 42 passengers in the tail boom, but this came to naught, although a model in Silver City colours was displayed at the 1952 Farnborough Air Show, where it was stated that the airline had ordered 3 at a cost of £300,000 each, but I'm not convinced that Silver City knew that they'd ordered 3. In the end, Bristol's came up with a stretched version of the freighter to carry 3 cars and 16 passengers. And you can see here, it was actually an earlier freighter that was converted on the production line with the additional fin area and a new nose. They also managed to install rather better quality seating. The new version was designated the Bristol 170 Mark 32, or Super Freighter, and Silver City ordered 6 at a cost of £90,000 each. It's about £2.5 million each today, for delivery in the spring of 1953. The arrival of the larger, heavier aircraft at Lympne in April '53 finally proved that the airfield was no longer suitable. On many occasions, after heavy rain, the aircraft had to be pulled out of the mud by a tractor, so a new home had to be found. At this point, the shipping company P&O were persuaded to make a substantial investment in BAS to fund future expansion. After a review of existing sites, it was decided to build a completely new airport at Dungeness Point, near Lydd, on the Kent coast. And a contract was awarded to Richard Costain Limited at a price of £400,000, about £10.5 million at today's prices. The need for better facilities was evident from the 1953 traffic figures. 21,700 cars and 91,000 passengers. On some days, more than 60 round trips a day were being operated between Lympne and Le Touquet. In early 1954, General Steam Navigation, a subsidiary of P&O, took control of BAS, Batavia and Silver City. With their shipping experience, the new board looked at entering the long-range trooping market and bought 6 Handley Page Hermes from BOAC, with trooping flights starting in July. That month saw the opening of Silver City's new base at Lydd, and at 0800 hours on the morning of the 13th of July, the inaugural flight took off for Le Touquet, just 6 months after the contract for the new airport had been placed. Heathrow Airport, please note. The new airport, christened Ferryfield, had 2 tarmac-covered concrete runways, a 300-foot-long terminal building and control tower complex, which was fronted by an apron capable of accommodating 6 super freighters parked wingtip to wingtip. When ready for departure, aircraft were towed back by a small tractor. Facilities in the terminal building included check-in desks, departure lounge, customs and immigration, baggage handling, AA and RAC offices, a snack bar and a licensed restaurant. Silver City employed their own air traffic control staff who monitored outbound aircraft at 1,000 feet and inbound aircraft at 2,000 feet. During one day in July 1954, there were 222 channel crossings by Silver City aircraft, and crews often flew 6 round trips a day, clocking up 100 hours a month. Taffy Powell said that the monotony of flying the same short route hour after hour, day after day, was compensated by a continuity of domestic life, which was often denied to the majority of airline pilots. And indeed, we have heard stories of, particularly the last flight coming across from Le Touquet, on the approach to Lydd, the pilot would flash the landing lights, which was a signal to his wife to say, "Get the dinner on, I'll be home in half an hour." By the end of the year, 31,000 cars and 112,000 passengers had been carried. The final Silver City flight from Lympne took off on the 3rd of October, thus bringing that chapter of the company's history to a close. A new air ferry service from Birmingham to Le Touquet had been inaugurated on the 17th of June 1954 with a flight time of 85 minutes, which is quite a long time to spend in a Bristol 170, which was often referred to by staff as the Bristol Freighter. Used to leak in the cockpit, and after extensive research, pilots and co-pilots discovered that the most appropriate material for bunging up the gaps when it rained was the Financial Times. And you could often see aircrew walking out from the terminal building with a rolled up copy of the Financial Times under their arm. I think probably the majority of passengers thought they were being overpaid. After parts of the new M1 motorway opened, Silver City pilots and their passengers sometimes had the dispiriting experience of being overtaken on the ground. With a fleet that now included 20 Bristol 170s and 6 Dakotas, it no longer made sense to ferry aircraft to and from Blackbush for maintenance, and a new engineering hangar capable of housing 3 super freighters nose to tail was built at Ferryfield in 1955, and you can see it there towards the rear of the site. In later years, the 170s suffered wing spar problems due to the continuous sequence of takeoffs and landings. This meant that the wings had to be removed and sent to Bristol's for repair. So there was often a wingless fuselage in the hangar, as well as 3 complete aircraft. The high point of 1956 was the visit of the Duke of Edinburgh to Ferryfield on the 5th of April. He arrived in a de Havilland Heron of the Queen's flight, which he had piloted himself, and was welcomed by Ian Meeke, the chairman, and Taffy Powell. Ian Meeke is shaking the Duke's hand, and you can see Taffy standing next to him. After a tour of the airport, where he was much amused to see the maintenance staff all standing there in absolutely spotless brand new overalls, the Duke and his party were escorted across the apron to super freighter GAMWD, which was loaded with 2 new sports cars, a Sunbeam Rapier and a Triumph TR3. Captain Dave Flett wound the nose doors shut as the Duke looked on, and knowing that the Duke liked to get involved in things, then asked him if he would like to operate the mechanical door latches. What neither of them knew was that the engineers had applied a fresh coat of red paint to the latches the night before, and it hadn't quite dried. So while the Duke stood there with red hands and others stood there with red faces, staff were dispatched to find some paint cleaner so that the Duke could be restored to spotless condition. Captains Dave Flett and Hoppy Hopkins and the Duke then climbed the ladder into the cockpit. And after takeoff, the Duke flew the aircraft to within a few miles of Le Touquet before handing over to Dave Flett for the landing. On arrival, a full guard of honour was present, and the Duke beckoned the guard commander to step forward and raised his lapel. The commander assumed that he was about to be decorated with some high honour. Instead, the Duke produced a small round tin badge inscribed "We Fly Silver City," which he pinned to the commander's lapel, and you can see it there proudly displayed above his medal ribbons. During 1957, the Air Ferry service, now spread over several routes, completed 1 million channel crossings since its inception in 1948. That year also saw the retirement of Taffy Powell on health grounds, with 2 joint managing directors taking his place. He was a bit of a workaholic. At Ferryfield, 60 round trips a day were now commonplace, and at peak times, it was said that Ferryfield saw more movements than London Airport, with a takeoff or landing every 2 minutes. The turnaround time for a super freighter was eventually reduced to just 11 minutes. From the moment a passenger arrived with their car at Ferryfield, only an hour elapsed before they were driving away from Le Touquet, and it became the way to cross the channel. I'm sure the people in these next few photos will need no introduction from me. Film stars and celebrities were frequently seen heading to or from the continent with their cars, although the larger Bentleys and Rolls-Royces posed a problem, as it was often impossible for the Silver City driver to open the car door once the vehicle was in the hold. This meant making an undignified exit through a window or sunroof, hopefully out of sight of the owner. In addition to the usual cars, Silver City carried various other loads over the years, including a wide variety of 4-legged cargo, not always self-loading like the 2-legged variety, and this sometimes created its own problems. Pigs found cable insulation irresistible, while a hold full of sheep soon got hot, causing lanolin fumes from their wool to seep into the cockpit and steam up the windows. And there is a story, which I'm assured is true, that 1 load of Romney Marsh sheep being transported to Belgium was found to have caused just such a problem. To overcome it, the crew removed one of the escape hatches from the side of the forward hold to improve ventilation. On arrival at Ostend with the next load, it was found that there was 1 fewer sheep being disembarked than had joined the flight at Ferryfield. And this conjures up an image of a lone yachtsman in mid-channel, gradually becoming aware of a loud whistling noise, followed by the appearance of a large sheep and a loud splash. And for the next flight, the open hatch was covered with chicken wire. Just over 50,000 cars were carried during 1958, some 60% more than in 1957. But revenue did not improve in line with the traffic. The fare for a small car, like a Morris Minor, was now just £5, about £105 today. And in May 1959, Silver City flew their 250,000th car. It was flown across the Channel by Captain Jerry Rosser, who had been co-pilot on the inaugural flight from Lympne 11 years before. In July, various events were held to mark the 50th anniversary of the first successful Channel crossing in a heavier-than-air machine by Louis Blériot, including a Daily Mail prize for the fastest journey between Marble Arch and the Arc de Triomphe, or vice versa. As you might imagine, Silver City were heavily involved with various attempts, including their own. Silver City entered a Renault Dauphine Gordini with Ian Meeke, the Silver City chairman, in the passenger seat, and Sterling Moss behind the wheel. Here he is coming onto the apron at Ferryfield on 2 wheels, I think. Now here we see the aircraft accepting the Renault, and 2 interesting things here. First of all, the car is not being driven on board by a Silver City loader driver. It's being driven by Sterling Moss, with Ian Meeke still in the passenger seat. I only know of one other occasion where a car was loaded by somebody other than the Silver City driver, and that was when the Queen's Rolls-Royce was flown across, I think in 1957, for a state visit, and it was flown to Paris. And they let the royal chauffeur drive it on board, presumably on the grounds that if he bent it, it would be his fault and not Silver City's. And the other thing to note is that the aircraft's engines are running. That would have been absolutely verboten on a standard passenger flight. Anyway, even with Sterling Moss driving, they still didn't win. Another entry arrived at Ferryfield on the 15th of July in the form of Jean Salis, flying a replica Blériot monoplane from Cap Blanc-Nez near Calais as part of his own attempt to win the prize. But with a time of 12 hours, 17 minutes and 22 seconds, he didn't really stand much chance compared with squadron leader Charles Morn flying a Hawker Hunter T7, who won with a time of 40 minutes and 44 seconds. By 1960, Silver City had become one of the best-known independent airlines in the country. However, there were now persistent rumours that a merger with Freddie Laker's Channel Air Bridge, which was based at Southend and also operated Bristol 170s, was in the offing. To an outsider, the 1961 traffic figures looked very good, with over 96,000 vehicles carried and 238,000 passengers. However, these apparently buoyant figures hid the fact that Silver City had made a loss of £250,000 in 1960 and £200,000 in 1961. That's over £4 million today. In January 1962, BAS decided to sell out to P&O, who had set up a new company called Air Holdings, to act as a holding company for British United Airways, of which Channel Air Bridge was also to be a subsidiary. British United Air Ferries, incorporating both Channel Air Bridge and Silver City, became operational on the 1st of January 1963. Although this was the end of Silver City as an independent company, air ferry operations continued at Ferryfield until early in 1971 using Carvairs. These have been developed by another Laker company, Aviation Traders Engineering Limited, in 1961 as a replacement for the Bristol 170, and were converted from Douglas C-54 military transports. They could carry 5 cars and 22 passengers. However, the airframes dated in most cases from 1944, and there were frequent engine problems. The final nail in the coffin for the Air Ferry was the development of improved cross-channel ships, particularly the introduction of roll-on, roll-off car ferries. During its relatively short life, Silver City had always looked to the future. As early as 1953, the company was considering the use of helicopters, using detachable car-carrying panniers below a twin-engined upper carrying unit. Passengers would have sat in a specially designed observation lounge at the front. It was expected that the ability to exchange inbound and outbound panniers with only a short delay would result in very high utilisation for the carrying units, and with new helidromes at Dover and Calais, the crossing distance could be reduced to a little over 22 miles. The final rotary wing project that was considered by Silver City was the enlarged production version of the Fairey Rotodyne, for which specification documents were developed in 1961. Large clamshell rear doors were initially specified as standard for the civil version to cater for air ferry operators, but they were soon deleted and would have had to have been specially ordered. With the demise of the Rotodyne project in 1962, the year that also saw the end of Silver City, all we have is this model of the prototype in Silver City colours, a fascinating might have been. So back to today. You might be surprised to learn that Silver City Airways still survives. Some years ago, Keith Dagwell, my predecessor as chairman of the Silver City Association, was able to acquire the company name. And if you look on the Companies House website, you will find it listed as an active company. I think by active, they just mean that we supply accounts and other returns every year. We don't actually fly anything. Needless to say, every self-respecting company has a registered office with its name proudly displayed outside. In our case, it's Keith's bungalow in Worthing. The Silver City name also continues to flourish in the form of the Silver City Association, with over 200 members worldwide and a popular website at www.silvercityairways.com. And the extensive Silver City collection is now housed at the BA Speedbird Heritage Centre near Heathrow. Sadly, there has not been time this evening to talk about many of Silver City's other activities, such as their operations in support of the oil industry in Libya, record-breaking transatlantic delivery flights of Canberra jet bombers, the London to Paris Silver Arrow service, on which the Hermes fleet was used from Manston, and the work of the company's Northern Division, based at Blackpool, not to mention air ferry services from other bases. As you can see, Silver City wasn't just about flying cars between Lydd and Le Touquet. Thank you very much for your attention, and I leave you with the thought that if you are planning on taking your car across the Channel this year, then fly Silver City. Thank you very much. Now, I don't know how we're doing for time.
We're fine, I think. Guys, all right for a bit more?
I've got a little bit of film, it lasts about 8 minutes, and it was filmed at Lydd in 1966. So it's after the end of Silver City as a separate company, so it's taken in British United days. So you'll see Carvairs and super freighters and freighters. Some of the super freighters are in the French company's colours, which were identical to Silver City's livery. You could tell them apart from the name, from the F prefix, aircraft registration, the tricolour on the fin, and I'm told the lingering smell of Gauloise cigarettes coming from the flight deck. We've lost the sound. So here we see one of the carvers. Obviously too high off the ground for the standard loading ramps, so they had a scissors lift to take the cars up. That's one of the French super freighters. When they started converting the aircraft to carvers, they discovered that depending on where the original aircraft had been built, in Chicago or Orlando, could account for up to 4 inches difference in the fuselage length, which made doing things like rewiring an absolute nightmare. Refuelling was also done on the apron, and an aircraft coming in needing fuel would fly a blue flag above the cockpit, and then the refuelling team knew which aircraft to go to. If you see a photograph with cars being driven out forwards, it's undoubtedly a publicity shot, because cars were usually driven up the ramp and into the aircraft and reversed out. And that is an aircraft landing, not struggling to take off. Still got Silver City on the headrest, and there's still time for duty free. One of many sources of leaks. you're away on your continental holiday. So that gives you a feeling for what it was like.
Excellent. It's always good to end a movie like that, and it gives you a flavour of the times. It's very interesting, actually, that the main airlines like BOAC and British European Airways weren't interested in this type of travel. It was very a specialist market.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, and, of course, Channel Tunnel now effectively replaces it. And, gentlemen, I think that was, and ladies, it was a good way of, I think, looking at a rather unique form of transport, which, alas, is not with us anymore. But please, any questions, information, etc., now's your opportunity. Wait for the mic, but anyone? There we are.
Many thanks for an absolutely fascinating talk. I was born and grew up in Southend, and I remember the Carvairs there. You talked about Channel Air Bridge. How big a competitor were they in terms of volume and so on to Silver City? And slightly related question, because if I recall, Channel Air Bridge made a lot of money out of the Berlin airlift, and that may be one of the things that got them started. Was Silver City involved with the Berlin airlift as well?
To answer that question first, yes, they were. And for quite a long time after the main airlift finished, because there was a sort of secondary airlift between Berlin and Hamburg, and they were involved in that to the extent of leasing from the manufacturers one of those enormous French Breguet de Pont double-deck freighters, which they employed on the airlift work. So yes, they did generate quite a bit of money in the same way that Freddie Laker did. Certainly initially, they were not direct competitors. Flying from Southend, I think the main route for Channel Air Bridge was to Ostend, and they did then operate, I think, from about 1956, Southend to Rotterdam. Silver City, to the best of my recollection, never sort of ventured that far north. They tended to concentrate Calais, Boulogne, certain extent Ostend, and then down to Cherbourg.
Thank you.
There was another operator, of course, Channel Airways, which was East Anglian Flying Services, and they operated a limited number of air ferry services as well.
Yeah, Lydd Ferryfield is still operational. Who owns it now, with the demise of Silver City? Or do you still own it?
No. It's passed through several different hands over the years. I forget the name of the company that owns it at the moment, but it is still operational, and there have been plans for a long time to expand it. You can get jets of, say, a Boeing 737 in and out, certainly empty. They were looking at extending the runway and actually doing sort of holiday charter flights. I think one of the issues has been that with question marks over the availability of Manston, which has got an enormous runway because it was built for heavy bombers, if you were going to operate from somewhere, you would probably operate from Manston rather than Ferryfield. It's also much easier to get to. So quite what the future holds for Lydd, we don't know.
Is there anywhere in the world that still operates a ferry like that, where you can drive a civilian car onto a plane and take off?
Not that I know of. There was a limited operation between North Island and South Island in New Zealand for a time by a company called Straits Air Freight Express, or SAFE, which is a good name for an airline. But I don't think it actually lasted very long, and certainly there's nowhere that I'm aware of now where you can do it. And I'm not sure. Somebody said to me, oh, well, I suppose if you were doing it today, you'd use something like a Lockheed Hercules. But the cost of operating one of those, you know, on a limited range flight, not actually carrying a vast amount of cargo, I don't think the sums would add up anymore.
Well, shall I just try and speak fairly loud? First of all, can I say what a fascinating talk that was? I really enjoyed it. And perhaps following on quite conveniently from the acronym SAFE, you alluded to the early years and the successful running and safe operation and so on. I'm aware of there being one, I think, overrun at Lympne with possibly it was a Dakota in the very early days, but as far as I'm aware, that was pretty much all. How safe a record did the operation have? Because
it was an incredibly good record, taking into account the number of flights that Silver City carried out. There was one accident during the Berlin airlift where, due to a succession of unfortunate circumstances, the aircraft ran out of fuel. It had been going backwards and forwards between Berlin and Hamburg. You know, the weather would clamp down in Berlin, so it would head for Hamburg, and then it would get there and find that the weather had closed in there. So he tried to go back to Berlin and eventually ran out of fuel, and came down next to the main railway line and stopped just short. And they were so relieved to be down in one piece, the pilot got out with his co-pilot through the top of the cockpit and sat on the wing and lit up a cigarette. And a woman came out of the local farmhouse and said, "Nick's rauchen, Nick's rauchen." And the pilot said, "Don't worry, lady, there isn't enough fuel left in the aircraft to light a cigarette." So that was one incident not directly related to the Air Ferry. There was a crash of a Silver City freighter on a charter from the Isle of Man, and that crashed near Bolton in bad weather. And then there were two accidents in Guernsey on the cross-channel services there, one of which was due to a technical malfunction on the aircraft. The pitch control on one engine failed, and the pilot was unable to control the aircraft on an overshoot, and it crashed. But in terms of the core Air Ferry service, I'm not aware of any, certainly no fatal accidents at all.
Thank you, Paul. That's a fascinating story and very well told. I just wondered whether, has it been written up in a book or some official record?
I'm very glad you mentioned that.
Just pass me the £5 you promised me later.
If you want to know the full story of Silver City, I can recommend this book by Keith Dagwell, who worked for the company for many, many years. And it tells the whole story from beginning to end. It was published by the History Press. I don't think it's currently in print, but you can certainly find copies on the internet. So there's the story.
Can I just ask when that was published, if you happen to know?
I think the first issue was 2010, yes. And then it was reprinted with a couple of very minor changes in 2012.
Thank you. I was interested to hear that the sad end of Silver City came because of really large losses. But I was just curious to know what those losses were attributed to.
Right. As there are no other Silver City employees in the room, I will say it was down to bad management. there were certainly, a bit like some other large organisations, any number of statistics were produced. Whether they led to sensible decisions at the Silver City board meetings is another matter. They had a policy of cutting fares in order to increase traffic volumes, which meant better load factors of on the aircraft, which meant that they made better use of them. Then there was the competition from Channel Air Bridge, reductions in the foreign currency allowance, all sorts of factors that contributed towards the demise of Silver City.
But you're saying that really they just didn't have a grip on their finances.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Actually, if I may, I think that goes with a lot of the airline business. It may be a safe form of transport. I mean, that's been proven here. But in terms of security of employment, maybe not. I've known a number of people in the industry who've had numerous jobs with airlines that are now just a name lost in the archives. So it needs to learn something that way. But in safety, yes, very good. But not security of tenure necessarily. Thank you. Are we done then? Anyone else? Thank you. Well, I think a most fascinating story, and thank you for explaining the detail of this airline and its business and the task of moving cars across the channel. I wish I'd tried. I remember buying Meccano magazine with a picture you had there and being fascinated by it, but I was only 9 then, so and my family hardly ever flew. I made up later. No, thank you very much, and thank you for coming. Thank you, Paul, for your very detailed and very professional way of presenting it all. I'm aware you have another interest in aviation with airships, and I think maybe we might ask you to talk about a rather short-lived and fascinating career with things like the R101. So if I may, with your consent, suggest perhaps next year we widen the aviation side to the airship area. So thank you. But meanwhile, let's one final thank you to our speaker tonight.
Thank you very much.
And a safe and punctual journey home to all of you. Thank you very much for coming.